He is lying. The words sliced through the boardroom so sharply that even the air seemed to stop moving. A dozen executives froze. The soft hum of the ceiling vents suddenly felt deafening. At the far end of the polished walnut table, Richard Whitmore slowly lowered his pen. The billionaire's blue eyes narrowed. The foreign investors exchanged confused glances. And standing beside the coffee cart, still holding a silver tray, was Naomi Brooks, a black maid. Richard stared at her for 2 long seconds. Then he laughed. The sound rolled across the room, cold and dismissive. "Excuse me?" he said. Several executives chuckled with him. Naomi felt every eye in the room land on her uniform, her name tag, her cleaning gloves. Heat crawled up her neck. "The interpreter is not translating the meaning correctly," she said quietly. The laughter grew louder. Victor Klein, the interpreter, adjusted his tie and smirked. "I have been doing this for 20 years. Richard leaned back in his chair. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, turning the skyline into a wall of gold. "And you clean hotel rooms?" he said. More laughter. Naomi's fingers tightened around the tray. The polished metal trembled slightly in her hands. She could hear her heartbeat over the distant traffic 30 stories below. She should have stayed silent. She knew that. But something felt wrong. The moment the foreign chairman had spoken, a knot had formed in her stomach. A phrase. A cultural expression. One sentence buried beneath perfect grammar. Victor had translated every word correctly. Every word except the truth hidden inside them. Richard tapped the contract with his pen. "Tell me, Naomi." His voice dripped with amusement. "What exactly are we paying experts for if the maid knows better?" The room erupted again. Naomi swallowed hard. Humiliation burned behind her eyes, but she refused to look away. Across the table, the foreign chairman was no longer smiling. That was what frightened her. Not the laughter. Not Richard. Him. The man had been watching her ever since she spoke. Watching carefully. Like he was waiting for something. Naomi glanced toward the contract. Hundreds of millions of dollars sat on those pages. One signature. One stroke of Richard's pen. The deal would be done. Victor folded his arms. "Security should remove her." Richard nodded. "Good idea." The words hit Naomi harder than she expected. She looked around the room. Nobody defended her. Nobody even looked uncomfortable. To them, she was invisible again. Just another hotel employee who forgot her place. 2 security guards appeared at the glass doors. Their footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Naomi's throat tightened. She had lost jobs before. She knew how quickly people stopped listening when they saw the uniform first. The guards moved closer. Richard picked up his pen again. "No," he said, smiling at the investors. "Where were we?" Then something unexpected happened. The foreign chairman suddenly spoke. One short sentence. Sharp. Fast. The room went silent. Victor's confident expression vanished. Richard frowned. "What did he say?" Victor hesitated. For the first time all morning, the interpreter looked nervous. Naomi felt a chill run through her body. The chairman had not looked at Victor when he spoke. He had looked directly at her. And then, in front of everyone, he slowly pointed across the table. Straight at Naomi Brooks. "No," he said in perfect English. "I would like her to answer." The room seemed to forget how to breathe. Naomi stood frozen beside the coffee cart as every head turned toward her. The foreign chairman kept his finger pointed in her direction. Richard Whitmore's smile faded by a fraction. Victor Klein swallowed hard. The city skyline glowed behind the glass walls, but inside the boardroom the atmosphere had gone cold. "You want her to answer?" Richard asked. The chairman nodded once. "Yes." A strange silence followed. Naomi could hear the faint buzz of the recessed lights overhead and the distant rumble of traffic 30 floors below. Her palms felt damp against the silver tray. Victor forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous." Nobody joined him. That frightened him more than the silence. The chairman leaned forward slightly. "Please," he said to Naomi. "Tell them what I actually meant." Naomi's pulse hammered in her ears. Every instinct told her to stay quiet. One wrong sentence could destroy what little stability she had left. Yet the chairman's eyes held steady. Waiting. Trusting. Slowly, Naomi set the tray down. The soft clink echoed through the room. Richard watched with folded arms. His expression screamed disbelief. "Go ahead," he said. "Entertain us." A few executives smirked. Naomi ignored them. She focused on the contract projected across the giant screen. Her eyes landed on a single paragraph. "The translation is technically correct," she said. Victor immediately straightened. Relief flashed across his face. Then Naomi continued. "But the phrase he used is not a business courtesy." The chairman nodded. Victor's relief vanished. Naomi pointed toward the screen. "In his culture, that expression means temporary stewardship." Several executives frowned. Richard's jaw tightened. "Meaning?" Naomi inhaled carefully. "Meaning the company signing this agreement would eventually surrender operational control." The room erupted with confused voices. Chairs shifted. Papers rustled. Richard's face darkened. "That is not what the contract says." Naomi looked directly at him. "Not in English." The words landed like a hammer. Victor stepped forward. "She has no idea what she is talking about." But his voice lacked confidence now. The chairman slowly reached into his briefcase and removed another document. Thick. Official. Bound with a red ribbon. Every executive watched as he placed it on the table. Richard's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" The chairman's answer came calmly. "The original version." Nobody moved. Naomi felt the tension spread through the room like electricity. Victor stared at the document as if he had seen a ghost. Richard noticed. For the first time all day, he looked less certain. "Victor?" Richard asked. The interpreter did not answer immediately. A bead of sweat rolled down the side of his face. The chairman opened the document and flipped through several pages. Then he stopped. His finger tapped a specific paragraph. Once. Twice. "Read it," he said. Victor remained motionless. Naomi felt something twist in her stomach. She suddenly realized this was bigger than a translation error. Much bigger. Richard rose slowly from his chair. The scrape of leather echoed through the boardroom. "Read it," he repeated. Victor's hands trembled as he reached for the document. Around the table, executives exchanged uneasy looks. The confidence that had filled the room an hour earlier was gone, replaced by suspicion. Fear. Questions nobody wanted answered. Victor looked down at the page. His face drained of color. Richard saw it immediately. "What is wrong?" he demanded. The interpreter opened his mouth. Closed it. Then opened it again. His voice cracked. Naomi felt her heartbeat quicken. The chairman leaned back silently. Watching. Waiting. Richard took one step closer. "Victor!" The interpreter looked up. Terror filled his eyes. And then he whispered 5 words that made the entire room freeze. "This contract was never intended." He stopped. The silence became unbearable. Richard's expression hardened. "Intended for what?" Victor stared at Naomi. Then at the chairman. Then at the document. Finally, he spoke. "Intended to make you a partner." The words hit the boardroom harder than any accusation. "Intended to make you a partner." Nobody spoke. The city lights reflected across the glass walls, turning every face pale and distant. Richard Whitmore stared at Victor as if he had stopped recognizing him. "Explain," Richard said. His voice was low now. "Dangerous." Victor swallowed. His collar looked suddenly too tight. Across the room, someone shifted in their chair. Another executive quietly reached for a phone beneath the table. The tiny glow of the screen flickered in the darkness. Naomi remained standing beside the coffee cart, invisible no longer. Her pulse hammered against her neck. She could feel dozens of eyes moving between her and Victor. The balance of the room had changed. Nobody knew exactly how, but everyone felt it. Victor cleared his throat. The acquisition structure was altered. Richard's eyes narrowed. By whom? Silence. The foreign chairman folded his hands calmly. He already knew the answer. That was obvious now. Richard took another step forward. The polished floor reflected the sharp outline of his shoes. Victor. The interpreter looked away. That was all it took. Richard's expression hardened. The room collectively realized something at the same moment. Victor was hiding something. Naomi noticed it too. Not fear of being wrong. Fear of being exposed. A cold sensation crawled up her spine. The agreement transfers control after 18 months, Naomi said quietly. Several executives turned toward her immediately. Richard did too. Victor's head snapped up. You do not know that. Naomi ignored him. The phrase used by the chairman was a warning. The chairman nodded once. The gesture was small, but it landed like a bomb. Murmurs spread across the table. One executive opened the original document. Another leaned over to read. Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time all day, nobody laughed when Naomi spoke. Victor noticed. And panic flashed across his face. This is being taken out of context, he said quickly. Too quickly. Sweat glistened near his temple under the recessed lights. Naomi watched him carefully. Something else was wrong. Something bigger. Then she saw it. A logo stamped faintly on the corner of the original document. Her stomach dropped. She knew that logo. Richard noticed her expression immediately. What? He asked. Naomi hesitated. Every eye returned to her. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like the walls were closing in. I have seen that company before. Victor froze. Richard caught it. Where? Naomi's voice was barely above a whisper. 3 months ago. The room became silent again. In a different contract. Richard frowned. What contract? Naomi looked down. Memories flashed through her mind. Long nights cleaning conference rooms. Empty coffee cups. Forgotten papers left behind by executives who never noticed her. Then she remembered. A restructuring proposal. Victor's face lost all color. Richard saw it happen. The billionaire turned slowly toward him. You were involved in that deal too. Nobody breathed. Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. One executive suddenly pushed back his chair. Wait. His voice shook. He grabbed a folder from his briefcase and started flipping through pages. Fast. Desperate. Paper rustled through the room. Then he stopped. His eyes widened. Richard. The billionaire looked at him. The executive's hand trembled slightly as he turned the folder around. This company already owns shares in 3 of our subsidiaries. The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Voices collided. Questions flew across the table. Richard stood completely still. The only motion came from the tightening muscles in his jaw. Naomi felt the pressure building like a storm. Every piece was connecting now. The chairman watched quietly. Victor looked trapped. And then, above the noise, a calm voice cut through everything. There is one more thing. The chairman had spoken. Instantly the room fell silent. He reached into his briefcase one final time. Slowly. Deliberately. Then he placed a thin envelope on the table. Richard stared at it. What is that? The chairman met his eyes. The name of the person who authorized the hidden transfer clause. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Even Victor stopped breathing. The chairman slid the envelope across the table toward Richard. And when Richard opened it, the blood drained from his face. Richard Whitmore stared at the paper as if it had suddenly become radioactive. The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system and the distant vibration of elevators moving somewhere inside the skyscraper. Nobody dared speak. Nobody even shifted in their seat. The billionaire's hand tightened around the envelope. Then tightened more. Naomi could see the color draining from his face. Whatever name was on that page, it had hit harder than the hidden clause itself. "No," Richard whispered. The single word barely reached the far end of the table. Yet everyone heard it. Every executive. Every investor. Every assistant standing against the wall. Victor looked down immediately. That reaction alone made several people exchange nervous glances. Richard slowly lifted his eyes. They landed on Victor. The interpreter seemed smaller now. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. Sweat glistened along his hairline beneath the cold white lights. "Tell me this is wrong," Richard said. Victor did not answer. Richard slammed the envelope onto the polished table. The sharp crack echoed through the room. Several people flinched. One executive dropped his pen. Another quietly started recording with a phone hidden beneath a folder. Naomi noticed. Everyone sensed history unfolding in real time. The foreign chairman remained calm. Almost too calm. Richard pointed at the document. "You approve this?" Victor's lips parted. Nothing came out. Silence answered for him. A wave of whispers spread through the room. The sound felt like a storm moving across dry leaves. Naomi felt her pulse climbing again. The deal was collapsing. But something still felt incomplete. Something was missing. She looked back toward the original contract. Her eyes moved across the pages. One line. Then another. The numbers. The percentages. The dates. Suddenly her stomach tightened. "Wait!" The word escaped before she realized she had spoken. Every head turned toward her again. Richard looked exhausted now. Angry. Humiliated. Cornered. Yet there was still enough pride left in him to be irritated by her interruption. "What now?" he snapped. Naomi stepped closer to the table. Her reflection shimmered across the polished wood beneath the conference lights. She pointed to a page near the back. "The transfer date." Victor immediately looked away. Naomi saw it. Richard saw it too. The billionaire's expression changed. Just slightly. "What about it?" Naomi swallowed. The room suddenly felt hot despite the air conditioning. "This clause does not activate in 18 months. A few executives frowned. One leaned forward. Another adjusted his glasses. Naomi pointed again. "It activates in 30 days. Silence. Complete silence. Richard blinked. Once. Twice. Then grabbed the document. Pages flipped rapidly beneath trembling fingers. The chairman said nothing. He did not need to. The truth was already spreading across the room. "That cannot be right." Richard's voice sounded distant now. Naomi shook her head slowly. "The date format is different." Several executives immediately stood. Chairs scraped against marble. Papers scattered. One attorney rushed forward and grabbed the contract. Another opened a laptop. Fingers flew across keyboards. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody even looked at Naomi like a maid. For the first time, they looked at her the way they looked at a crisis. Then the attorney froze. His face turned pale. "She is right." The words detonated across the room. Panic followed. Questions collided. Voices rose. The controlled atmosphere of the boardroom shattered. Richard stared at the page. 30 days. Not 18 months. 30 days until he lost control of the company he had spent 30 years building. Naomi felt a chill run down her arms. Victor closed his eyes. The chairman watched everything unfold with unsettling calm. Then Richard slowly lifted his head. His gaze moved from Victor to the chairman. Then finally to Naomi. For a brief second, something unexpected appeared in his eyes. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear. Real fear. But before anyone could speak again, A notification sound cut through the chaos. Sharp. Electronic. Every head turned. One of the executives stared at his phone screen. His face lost all color. Richard! His voice shook. You need to see this. The billionaire took the phone. Naomi watched his eyes scan the screen. Watched his expression collapse completely. Then he looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Far below, dozens of flashing news vans were suddenly pulling up outside the building. And on the phone screen, the headline had already gone live. The headline spread through the room faster than panic. Richard's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. The glow from the screen reflected in his eyes. Around him, executives were already pulling out their own devices. One after another. Notification sounds erupted across the boardroom like distant alarms. The silence shattered. How is this public? Someone whispered. Another executive was already refreshing a news feed. The flashing red banner filled his screen. Market shock. Whitmore Global faces secret control transfer allegations. Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, more satellite trucks were arriving below. Their bright rooftop lights flashed against the glass like warning beacons. The story was spreading. Fast. Too fast. Richard looked toward Victor. Did you leak this? His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that scared people. Victor immediately shook his head. No. Then who did? Nobody answered. The boardroom suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. The soft hum of the air conditioning no longer seemed strong enough. Naomi noticed investors exchanging looks. Nervous looks. The kind people shared when they were calculating escape routes. One of the attorneys stepped away from the table and answered a phone call. 30 seconds later, he returned looking pale. 3 investors are already suspending participation. The words landed like a punch. Richard closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something had changed. The billionaire who controlled every room he entered suddenly looked like a man losing control of his own future. Then his gaze shifted toward Naomi. The room followed. Every eye turned toward her. Naomi immediately felt it. The weight. The suspicion. The invisible pressure crushing down from every direction. She had been the one to notice the translation issue. The hidden clause. The transfer date. And now the scandal was public. The timing felt impossible. No, Naomi whispered. Richard stared at her. No? You think I did this? Nobody spoke. The silence answered for them. Naomi felt humiliation burn across her face. A few hours ago they ignored her. Now they looked at her like a threat. Like a suspect. Like someone dangerous. One investor folded his arms. She knew too much. Another nodded slowly. Victor looked relieved. For the first time all day, suspicion had shifted away from him. Naomi saw it happen. Saw the tiny flicker of hope return to his eyes. That was when something clicked. A detail. Small. Strange. Wrong. Naomi turned toward the conference screen. Her pulse quickened. Wait. Nobody listened. Richard was already speaking with attorneys. Investors were arguing. Phones continued vibrating across the room. The chaos kept growing. Wait, Naomi said louder. This time several heads turned. Richard looked exhausted. Not now. Naomi stepped forward anyway. Her shoes echoed across the marble floor. The leak did not come from this room. A few executives rolled their eyes. One laughed bitterly. Richard rubbed his forehead. How could you possibly know that? Naomi pointed toward the giant display screen. Her finger stopped on the headline. Everyone followed her gaze. Look at the timestamp. Silence. The nearest attorney squinted. Then frowned. Another executive opened the article. His face changed instantly. Oh my God! Richard grabbed the phone. Naomi felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The article had gone live 43 minutes earlier. 43 minutes. Long before the meeting collapsed. Long before the hidden transfer date was discovered. Long before anyone in the room understood the danger. The realization hit the boardroom all at once. Someone already knew. Someone had expected this meeting to fail. A chill swept through the room. Investors stopped talking. Attorneys stopped typing. Even Victor looked confused now. Richard slowly lowered the phone. That means... Naomi nodded. Somebody planned this. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The chairman watched her carefully. Not surprised. Almost impressed. Then another phone vibrated. Loud. Sharp. Impossible to ignore. Richard looked down at the incoming message. His expression changed instantly. Every trace of color disappeared from his face. Naomi saw it happen. The room saw it happen. Richard opened the message. A single image appeared on the screen. An image from inside this very boardroom. Taken less than 10 minutes ago. The angle was impossible. Nobody here had taken it. And beneath the image was a single sentence. I know exactly who is standing next to you. The image stayed on Richard's phone screen like a threat that refused to blink. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The boardroom that had been drowning in chaos only seconds ago suddenly fell into a silence so heavy it felt physical. The soft vibration of phones continued across the room. One here. Another there. Tiny sounds in a sea of tension. Richard stared at the image. Then at Naomi. Then back at the image again. His breathing had changed. Slower. Heavier. Controlled only on the surface. The message had done something the hidden contract could not. It had made him afraid. Outside the glass walls, the flashing lights from news vehicles painted red and white reflections across the polished table. The colors moved silently over contracts, laptops, and nervous hands. Naomi could feel every eye in the room fixed on her. Not because she was a maid anymore. Because she was standing closest to the center of a mystery nobody understood. One investor shifted uneasily. Another quietly lowered his phone. Even Victor had stopped trying to defend himself. Everyone was waiting. Richard finally spoke. Who are you? His voice was barely above a whisper. Naomi blinked. The question hit harder than any accusation. She looked at him carefully. For the first time all day, the billionaire was not looking down on her. He was looking for answers. Naomi lowered her gaze toward the image. Something about it bothered her. Not the photo itself. The angle. The timing. The distance. She stepped closer. Richard hesitated before handing her the phone. That hesitation did not go unnoticed. Hours earlier, he would not have trusted her with a coffee order. Now he was trusting her with the only clue in the room. Naomi studied the image. The boardroom appeared exactly as it had minutes earlier. The lighting. The table. The investors. Everything. But then she saw it. Her heartbeat slowed instead of quickened. That surprised her. Everyone else seemed trapped in panic. Yet the closer she looked, the calmer she became. This was not taken from inside the building, she said quietly. Several executives frowned. Richard immediately looked at her. How do you know? Naomi zoomed in on the reflection inside the window. A faint distortion. Barely visible. Easy to miss. Because whoever took it is outside. Silence. The room absorbed the statement slowly. Like cold water sinking through concrete. One attorney stepped forward. That is impossible. We are 40 floors up. Naomi nodded. Exactly. Nobody answered. The realization spread gradually. If someone outside the building had taken the image, then this was larger than corporate sabotage. Larger than Victor. Larger than the contract. Richard looked toward the glass wall overlooking Manhattan. The city lights stretched endlessly into the distance. Thousands of windows. Thousands of shadows. Somewhere out there, somebody was watching. The thought sent a chill through the room. Naomi handed the phone back. Her hands were steady. Richard noticed. So did everyone else. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Executives were sweating. Investors were whispering. Attorneys were making frantic calls. Yet the maid they had laughed at hours earlier was the calmest person in the building. One investor finally spoke. "How are you seeing things none of us see?" Naomi opened her mouth. Then stopped. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. A classroom. A professor. Stacks of documents. Endless hours studying risk analysis and pattern recognition. The life she had buried years ago. She looked away. "I just pay attention." The answer felt too small for what was happening. Yet nobody laughed. Not anymore. Richard studied her face. A different expression had appeared in his eyes now. Not suspicion. Not pity. Respect. Reluctant. Uncomfortable. Real. Then another vibration cut through the silence. Richard glanced at his phone. A second message had arrived. No image this time. Only text. His face tightened instantly. Naomi saw it happen. The room saw it happen. Richard read the message once. Then again. Nobody dared interrupt. Finally, one executive asked, "What does it say?" Richard did not answer immediately. The silence stretched. Long enough to make every heartbeat feel louder. Then he slowly looked up. His eyes locked onto Naomi. "They are not asking about me," he said. Nobody understood. Richard swallowed. For the first time all day, his voice carried genuine uncertainty. "They are asking for you." The words hung over the boardroom like a thunderclap that nobody was prepared to hear. "They are asking for you." Nobody looked away from Naomi. Not the investors. Not the attorneys. Not the executives who had laughed at her less than an hour earlier. The city lights shimmered across the glass walls behind her, casting silver reflections across faces frozen in disbelief. Naomi felt every heartbeat in the room. Every breath. Every ounce of pressure. Yet strangely, she felt calm. Richard Whitmore did not. The billionaire stood motionless beside the conference table, phone still in his hand. The man who had controlled billion-dollar negotiations for decades suddenly looked like he had stepped into a conversation where everyone else knew the rules except him. "Who are they?" one investor finally asked. Richard looked down at the message again. His throat tightened. "They are refusing to speak to anyone else." Silence followed. Heavy. Suffocating. Naomi could hear the faint vibration of another phone somewhere across the room. She could hear the low hum of the building's climate system. Tiny sounds. Loud only because nobody dared speak. Then the foreign chairman surprised everyone. He stood. Slowly. Deliberately. The movement instantly pulled every eye toward him. He adjusted his jacket and looked directly at Naomi. "I believe it is time." Richard frowned. "Time for what?" The chairman ignored him. His gaze never left Naomi. "Tell them who taught you to recognize the clause." Naomi froze. For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed her face. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Richard stared at her. "What does he mean?" Naomi looked down briefly. The polished surface of the conference table reflected her expression. Memories surfaced. Years she had buried. A life nobody in this room had ever imagined. "I used to work in risk analysis," she said quietly. Nobody reacted at first. The statement felt too small. Too simple. Then the chairman smiled faintly. "Not just risk analysis." Naomi closed her eyes for a second. The room waited. "I worked for the International Contract Oversight Institute." The silence that followed was absolute. One attorney actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded impossible. The laugh died immediately. The chairman reached into his briefcase and removed a worn folder. He placed it on the table. Slowly. The soft sound echoed through the room. Richard opened it. His eyes widened. Then widened more. Every color disappeared from his face. The document contained Naomi's name. Certifications. Reports. International reviews. Investigations involving contracts worth billions. One investor stepped closer. Then another. Suddenly everyone wanted to see. The room transformed. Not with noise. With realization. The maid they had dismissed. The woman they had mocked. The person security had nearly removed from the building. She was the most qualified contract analyst in the room. More qualified than Victor. More qualified than several attorneys. Possibly more qualified than the people negotiating the deal itself. Nobody knew what to say. Richard looked at Naomi. Truly looked at her for the first time. Not at her uniform. Not at her name tag. At her. The humiliation that had belonged to Naomi all day suddenly shifted direction. Every executive felt it. Every investor felt it. The weight of their assumptions. Their laughter. Their certainty. Then came the final blow. The chairman spoke calmly. The person sending those messages contacted me 2 weeks ago. Richard snapped his head toward him. You knew? I knew someone was trying to expose the transfer scheme. The room erupted. Questions collided. Voices rose again. But Naomi remained still. Because one detail bothered her. One detail nobody else seemed to notice. 2 weeks ago. Her stomach tightened. The sender had contacted the chairman before this meeting existed. Before the leak. Before the scandal. Before everything. Which meant something far worse. Richard saw her expression change. What is it? Naomi slowly lifted her eyes. The room quieted immediately. She pointed toward the phone in Richard's hand. The sender is not trying to destroy your company. Richard frowned. Then what are they doing? Naomi looked around the boardroom. At Victor. At the investors. At the attorneys. At the chairman. Then toward the dark city beyond the glass. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. They are trying to warn us about someone who is still in this room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And at that exact moment, the conference room doors behind them quietly clicked open. The soft click of the conference room door echoed through the silence like a final verdict. Every head turned at once. The tension that had been building for hours suddenly changed shape. It was no longer panic. It was anticipation. The kind that settled deep in the chest and refused to leave. A man stepped into the room wearing a dark security jacket. Nothing remarkable about him at first glance. Yet the moment the foreign chairman saw him, he stood. Slowly. Respectfully. The reaction did not go unnoticed. Neither did the look on Richard Whitmore's face. The billionaire stared as if he had just recognized a ghost. The room remained silent. Even the reporters gathering outside seemed far away now. The flashing lights below reflected faintly across the glass walls, painting moving streaks of white across the polished table. The security officer stepped forward and placed a small folder in front of Richard. Then he looked directly at Naomi. Not with suspicion. Not with curiosity. With recognition. Real recognition. The room felt that too. One investor lowered his phone. Another sat forward. Nobody wanted to miss what came next. Richard opened the folder. His hands moved slower now. Gone was the commanding certainty that had filled the room earlier. The pages contained emails. Internal reports. Financial records. One by one. The evidence spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle finally locking into place. Victor looked down. Several executives exchanged stunned glances. The hidden transfer. The manipulated language. The media leak. They had all been connected. But not by Naomi. Never by Naomi. Richard swallowed hard. His eyes drifted toward her. Then back to the documents. Then toward her again. The realization settling over him seemed almost painful. Hours earlier he had laughed at her. Questioned her. Nearly had her removed from the room. Yet every major discovery. Every warning. Every truth. Had come from her. The room understood it now. The shift was visible. Executives who would not even make eye contact with her before now watched her carefully. Investors listened whenever she spoke. Attorneys quietly compared notes she had pointed out hours ago. The atmosphere had completely changed. Naomi felt it. She could see it in their faces. But she said nothing. Her hands remained folded calmly in front of her. No victory. No satisfaction. Just quiet composure. Somehow that made the moment even more powerful. Then Richard stood. The movement drew every eye back toward him. The billionaire looked older than he had that morning. The lines around his eyes deeper. His shoulders heavier. For several seconds he simply stared at Naomi. The room waited. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Finally Richard spoke. "I owe you an apology." Silence followed. Deep. Uncomfortable. Honest. Several executives lowered their eyes immediately. Victor looked away completely. Richard took a slow breath. "Not because you were right." He paused. The words seemed difficult to say. "Because I never gave you the chance to be heard." Naomi looked at him quietly. The room absorbed every syllable. The apology was not loud. It was not dramatic. Yet somehow it carried more weight than any speech. Richard glanced around the boardroom. At the executives who had laughed. At the investors who had doubted her. At the people who had seen a uniform before they saw a person. The shame in the room became visible. Almost tangible. Then something unexpected happened. One of the senior investors stood. Then another. And another. Not applause. Something more meaningful. Respect. The atmosphere softened. Not completely. The danger was still there. The scandal still existed. The company was still under threat. But for the first time all day, Naomi was no longer standing alone. The security officer quietly stepped beside the chairman and whispered something. The chairman's expression changed immediately. Not fear. Concern. Naomi noticed. Richard noticed too. The room grew still once again. The chairman slowly turned toward Naomi. "There is one final matter." His voice was calm, but something underneath it had shifted. The emotional warmth that had begun spreading through the room suddenly cooled. Naomi felt it instantly. The chairman looked at her with a mixture of respect and regret. Then he placed a sealed envelope on the table. Her name was written across the front. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The room went silent. Nobody knew who had sent it. Nobody knew what was inside. Naomi stared at the envelope. And for the first time all day, her calm expression finally cracked. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Naomi stood motionless as the room watched her. The boardroom that had been filled with arguments, accusations, and panic now sat in complete silence. The flashing lights from the news trucks below still reflected across the windows, but even they seemed distant now. Nobody cared about the cameras anymore. Nobody cared about the headlines. Every eye remained on Naomi. Slowly, she opened the envelope. The sound of the paper breaking echoed softly through the room. Inside was a single letter. Folded once. Nothing more. Naomi unfolded it carefully. Her hands trembled slightly. The room noticed. Richard noticed most of all. As her eyes moved across the page, something shifted inside her expression. Not fear. Not shock. Something gentler. Sadder. For several seconds she said nothing. The silence stretched. Then Richard spoke quietly. "What is it?" Naomi looked down at the signature at the bottom of the page. A name she had not seen in years. The sender was the former mentor who had trained her at the institute. The man who had once told her she could become one of the best analysts in the world. The man she thought had forgotten her after she left everything behind to care for her mother. Her eyes softened. The letter was short. He had been the anonymous source. He had uncovered the scheme months earlier. He had tracked the contracts. Followed the money. Connected the pieces. But he had written one final line. The line that stopped Naomi's breath. Because he knew there was only one person who would recognize the hidden warning buried inside the deal. Her. Naomi folded the letter carefully. The room remained still. No one asked another question. Somehow they already understood. It had never been luck. It had never been coincidence. The truth had found the one person willing to see it. Richard slowly sat down. The leather chair creaked softly beneath him. For the first time all day, he looked exhausted. Not by the scandal. Not by the money. By the realization of how wrong he had been. He glanced toward Naomi. Then toward the coffee cart still standing quietly against the wall. The same cart beside which he had laughed at her. The memory seemed to hit him harder now than any financial loss. "You saved my company," he said. Naomi looked at him. "No." Her voice was calm. "I just told the truth." The simplicity of the answer settled over the room. Several investors lowered their eyes. One executive quietly closed his laptop. Another placed his phone face down on the table. The recording had stopped. The judging had stopped. The room itself seemed different now. Smaller. More human. Richard stood once more. This time there was no authority in the gesture. No performance. He walked around the conference table slowly. The sound of his shoes echoed across the polished floor. Then he stopped in front of Naomi. The billionaire extended his hand. Not as a businessman. Not as a boss. As a man acknowledging another human being. Naomi looked at it for a moment before shaking it. The room watched in silence. Nobody applauded. Nobody spoke. They did not need to. The moment carried its own weight. Outside, dawn was beginning to creep across the horizon. The first pale light of morning touched the glass towers of Manhattan. The city was waking up. The crisis was not completely over. There would still be investigations. Headlines. Questions. Consequences. But something important had already changed. Richard looked out at the growing light. Then back at Naomi. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Naomi glanced toward the windows where the darkness was slowly giving way to gold. A faint smile touched her face. Not triumphant. Peaceful. "Now people start paying attention." No one answered. The room simply stood there as sunlight spilled across the table, across the contracts, across the faces of people who would never see each other the same way again. And in the reflection of the glass, the maid they once ignored was no longer standing at the edge of the room. She stood at the center of it, calm and unshaken, while the first light of a new day rose behind her.